For 37 years, my life was measured in paces, steps, and envelopes. I was a letter carrier for the United States Postal Service, walking the concrete and asphalt of Chicago's Riverside route. In the winter, the wind off Lake Michigan would slice through my regulation wool trousers like a razor blade, and my fingers would grow so numb I could barely sort the mail. In the summer, the heat would rise from the pavement in shimmering waves, melting the soles of my shoes and making the leather strap of my mailbag bite deep into my shoulder. But I never complained. I took pride in that uniform. I took pride in knowing the names of every family on my route, in delivering the letters that brought news of births, marriages, and sometimes the quiet grief of loss. My wife, Eleanor, passed away when our son, Gregory, was only 7 years old. She was the love of my life, a soft-spoken woman with a laugh that could clear the clouds from the grayest Chicago afternoon. When the cancer took her, it felt like the world had been drained of its color. I was left alone with a young boy who looked at me with wide, frightened eyes, wondering why his mother wasn't coming home. From that day on, Gregory became my entire world. I made a promise to Eleanor on the night she died that I would give our son everything he needed to succeed, no matter the cost. And I kept that promise. I worked every scrap of overtime I could get. I took double shifts during the holidays, walking until my knees throbbed, and my lower back was a knot of constant, dull pain. I wore the same winter coat for 15 years, patching the elbows with duct tape, and I skipped more meals than I care to remember, telling Gregory I had eaten at the post office so he could have the larger portion of meat at dinner. When he showed an interest in the law, I scraped together the money for SAT prep courses. When he got into Northwestern University, I took out a second mortgage on our small bungalow to pay the tuition my pension and mailman's salary couldn't cover. I didn't care about the debt. I didn't care about the wear and tear on my body. I was building a future for my son. And Gregory built it. He excelled in college, sailed through law school, and was hired by one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in downtown Chicago. His office was on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper overlooking the lake. The lobby was lined with polished Italian marble, and the receptionists spoke in hushed, elegant tones. He married Brenda, a woman who came from a wealthy family in Oak Park. Brenda was what they called a lifestyle consultant, which, as far as I could tell, meant she spent Gregory's money on hiring people to organize their closets and planning parties for people they didn't particularly like. They bought a massive colonial house in Oak Park, a place with 5 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms. It was a world away from the small, drafty 2-bedroom apartment I had moved into after selling the bungalow to pay off the college debts. I was proud of him, I really was, but as Gregory's success grew, the distance between us seemed to widen. At first, he would come by for dinner once a week. Then it became once a month. Then the visits stopped altogether, replaced by quick phone calls on Sunday evenings that always felt rushed, as if he were looking at his watch the entire time. "Hey Dad, just checking in. Busy week ahead. Talk soon." That was the routine. Christmas was reduced to a text message and a gift card to a steakhouse, where a single side dish cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I told myself it was fine. He was a busy lawyer. He had a wife, a career, a life in high society. I was just an old, retired mailman with creaking knees and a pension that barely covered the rent. I didn't want to drag him down. Then the chest pains started. It began as a tight, squeezing sensation in my chest when I climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment. I brushed it off. Old age, I told myself. Just the accumulated wear and tear of carrying a 50-pound mailbag for nearly 4 decades. But the pain grew worse, spreading down my left arm and making it hard to catch my breath. I couldn't afford to go to the doctor for every little ache, so I kept quiet, popping aspirin and hoping it would pass. It didn't. One Tuesday morning, while carrying a bag of groceries from the store, my chest felt like it was being gripped by a vice. The world spun, the sky turned a strange, muddy gray, and I collapsed onto the cracked concrete of my building's parking lot. The grocery bag burst open, oranges rolling under the cars. If it hadn't been for my neighbor, Mrs. O'Leary, a retired schoolteacher who happened to be checking her mailbox, I might have died right there. She found me, called 911, and held my hand until the ambulance arrived, its sirens wailing through the quiet street. At the hospital, the doctors didn't sugarcoat it. I had severe coronary artery disease. 3 of my main arteries were almost completely blocked. You need a triple bypass, Mr. Vance, the cardiologist told me, his face grave. If we don't operate within the week, you won't survive the year. The news was a physical blow. The surgery alone would cost tens of thousands of dollars. Medicare would cover a portion, but the co-pays and the cost of recovery would wipe out what little savings I had left. More than the money, though, was the terror of being alone. I needed someone to be there. I needed my son. I called Gregory from my hospital bed. It took 3 calls before he finally answered. When he did, the background was filled with the clinking of glasses, classical music, and the chatter of wealthy voices. He was at some corporate fundraising gala. "Dad, this is really bad timing," Gregory said, his voice hushed but impatient. "Brenda and I are hosting the senior partners at a charity auction. Can this wait until tomorrow?" Gregory: "I'm in the hospital," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "They're telling me I need open-heart surgery, a triple bypass. They want to do it this Friday." There was a long pause on the line. The background noise suddenly grew muffled, as if he had stepped into a hallway or a restroom. "Friday? Dad, that's impossible. I have the deposition for the Miller case on Friday. It's a multi-million-dollar suit. I can't just walk away from it." "Gregory, please," I whispered, the tears finally spilling over my eyelids. "I'm scared. I don't want to go through this alone. I need you here." "Dad, you're being dramatic," he said, and I could hear the irritation creeping into his voice. "The doctors do these surgeries every day. You're tough. You raised me on your own, remember? Look, I'll try to get away this weekend after the operation. I have to go now. Brenda's looking for me. Good luck." The line went dead. He didn't come that weekend. He didn't come the weekend after. He sent a single text message the morning of my surgery. "Thinking of you, Dad. Good luck today." The surgery was a success, but the recovery was a nightmare. When I woke up, the physical pain was excruciating. My sternum had been sawed in half and wired back together. Every breath felt like hot coal in my chest. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold, hollow ache of abandonment. In the recovery ward, the other 3 men had families hovering over them. Their wives smoothed their hair. Their adult children brought them cups of ice chips and adjusted their pillows. Their grandchildren drew get-well cards that were taped to the walls. My bedside table remained bare, no flowers, no cards, just a plastic pitcher of water and the rhythmic, mocking beep of the heart monitor. On the 3rd day, a no-nonsense discharge nurse named Nurse Clara came into my room. She checked my vitals, looked over my chart, and then leaned against the foot of my bed. "Mr. Vance, the doctors are clearing you for discharge this afternoon. Your vitals are stable, but you've just had major surgery. You cannot drive. You cannot lift anything heavier than a half-gallon of milk. And you cannot climb stairs. You need someone at home with you for at least the next 2 weeks to help with your meals, manage your medications, and watch for signs of infection." I stared at the ceiling, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "I'll manage," I said quietly. "No, you won't," Nurse Clara said, her tone firm but not unkind. "Hospital policy is very strict about this. We cannot discharge an open-heart patient to an empty home without a designated caregiver. Do you have family? A friend?" "My son," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "But he's very busy with his law firm. He lives in Oak Park." "Have you called him?" "I tried," I admitted. The truth was, I had called Gregory 3 times that morning. Each time, the call had gone straight to voicemail. On the 4th try, the call didn't even ring. It went directly to a recording stating that the subscriber was not accepting calls. He had blocked my number. He had blocked his own father 3 days after open-heart surgery because he didn't want to deal with the burden of my recovery. Nurse Clara looked at me, and I saw the pity in her eyes. I hated it. I had spent my entire life working hard, paying my taxes, and taking care of my family. I had never asked for charity. Now, I was a 64-year-old man who couldn't even arrange a ride home from the hospital because his own son had locked him out of his life. "I'll see what I can do," Nurse Clara said quietly, turning to leave the room. "Give me an hour." I lay in the sterile room, the sun casting long, bleak shadows across the linoleum. The thought of my cold apartment, the flight of stairs, and the empty refrigerator filled me with dread. I was trapped. I couldn't stay, and I had nowhere to go. A light knock on the doorframe broke the silence. I looked up, expecting Nurse Clara with a social worker. Instead, it was Dr. Edward Sinclair. Dr. Sinclair was the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Chicago General. He was the man who had held my heart in his hands, who had bypass grafted 3 of my clogged arteries while I lay unconscious. He was a tall man in his late 60s, with a thick mane of silver hair and sharp blue eyes. He wore a crisp white lab coat over a tailored suit, and he possessed an aura of quiet authority. Usually he was surrounded by medical residents, but today he was alone. "Mr. Vance," Dr. Sinclair said, pulling up the chair next to my bed. His voice was a warm, resonant baritone. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I've been run over by a mail truck." I attempted to joke, though the laugh caught in my throat. Dr. Sinclair smiled. "Well, that's to be expected. I did have to open you up quite a bit. But the surgery was clean, and your heart is beating with a strength it hasn't had in years. The plumbing is fixed, Arthur. But I hear from Clara that the discharge plan is complicated." I looked away, staring out the window. "I don't want to be a burden. I'll figure something out. I can take a cab to my apartment. The driver will help me up the stairs if I tip him. Clara tells me you live on the second floor of a walk-up, 40 miles from here. And you live alone," Dr. Sinclair said, his eyes fixed on me. "She also mentioned your son has not been reachable." A flush of shame crept up my neck. "Gregory is a busy man. He's a partner at a firm downtown." "Arthur," Dr. Sinclair said, placing a hand gently on the edge of my mattress. "If you go back to that apartment alone today, you are risking your life. You cannot cook, you cannot carry groceries, and if you trip, there will be no one to help you. You have a high risk of complications. You need proper care." "I don't have the money for a rehabilitation center, Dr. Sinclair. My pension doesn't cover that. I'll just have to take my chances." Edward leaned back, studying me. "I have a proposal. It is highly irregular, but I want you to come stay at my home for the next 2 weeks." I stared at him. "Stay at your home?" "Yes. I live in Lake Forest. I have a large house with empty rooms since my wife passed away. I have a full-time private nurse, Martha, who manages my own health needs. She can monitor your recovery, handle medications, and ensure you eat properly. You will have your own room on the ground floor. No stairs." "Doctor, I can't accept that. I'm a retired mailman. You're the chief of surgery. I don't know you. Why would you make an offer like that to a stranger?" Edward stood up, walking toward the window. "Let me ask you a question, Arthur. Do you remember working the Riverside Mail route in the early 90s? I frowned. "Of course. I walked that route for over a decade. Do you remember a building at 447 Maple Street? A rundown 4-story red brick apartment complex?" "I do. It was mostly students. The heat was always breaking down. I remember the landlord was a real piece of work." Edward turned around, a faint smile on his lips. "In the winter of 1991, there was a young medical student living on the 3rd floor. He worked 30 hours a week at a gas station just to pay tuition and buy ramen. He was exhausted and on the verge of dropping out because he couldn't afford anatomy textbooks or rent. One freezing January afternoon, he went to his mailbox. Inside was a plain white envelope, no stamp, no return address. My chest tightened. My mind flashed back 35 years to a memory of a young kid trudging through the snow in a thin denim jacket. Inside that envelope, Edward continued, was $500 in cash and a short note on a scrap of lined paper. It said, "Keep going. Someone believes in you." I stared at him. I was that medical student, Arthur. That $500 saved my life. It was the only thing that kept me from packing my bags. It gave me the strength to keep going. I always wondered who sent it. For 35 years, I looked for that benefactor. "How did you find out?" I whispered. 2 weeks ago, when your file landed on my desk. I saw your name, Arthur Vance. I saw your occupation. I saw your old route. I went home and pulled out my old journals. I still have that note. I compared the handwriting to the signature on your consent forms. It was an exact match." I leaned back, overwhelmed. I did that sometimes. When I was on my route, if I saw someone truly struggling, I'd slip a little cash and a note into their box. I never wanted anyone to know. I know. But the universe has a strange way of balancing the books. When Clara told me you had no caregiver, no way home, and a son who wouldn't answer his phone, I realized that the boy you saved 35 years ago was now the surgeon who could save you. Today I want to pay the dividends. Not as a debt, but as one human being thanking another. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Edward." Edward smiled. Good, let's get you out of here. The drive to Lake Forest was quiet. Donald, a polite gentleman of about my age, drove a black Mercedes that rode so smoothly I barely felt the bumps. We pulled up to a massive stone mansion in Lake Forest, surrounded by towering oak trees and manicured lawns. Donald helped me inside, where a nurse named Martha was waiting. "Welcome, Mr. Vance," Martha said. "Dr. Sinclair told me all about you. Let's get you settled." She led me to a large guest suite on the first floor. The room was beautiful, filled with dark wood furniture, a king-size bed, a fireplace, and a large window looking out over a courtyard. Through a side door was a private bathroom. "No stairs to navigate," Martha explained. "I'll check on you 3 times a day. If you need anything, there's a call button." That evening, Edward joined me in the guest room. A cook named Teresa brought us dinner, a delicious, low-sodium chicken breast with roasted vegetables. Over the next week, a comfortable routine established itself. In the mornings, Martha checked my vitals. In the afternoons, I read books from Edward's library or walked through the courtyard. Every evening, Edward and I sat together and talked. We talked about everything. Edward told me about his late wife, Evelyn, who passed away from pancreatic cancer 5 years earlier. He spoke of the silence that had settled over the house, a silence he tried to drown out by working. He had no children, and his only sister in Florida only contacted him to ask about the family estate. "I spent my whole life building a career, Arthur," Edward told me. "But when Evelyn died, I realized that all the money didn't mean a damn thing if there was no one to share it with. The house was just a museum of empty rooms." I told him about Eleanor and the struggle of raising Gregory alone. "I thought I did everything right, Edward. I worked myself to the bone, but somewhere along the way, I lost him. He became so focused on status that he forgot where he came from." Edward looked at me. "Healing a heart isn't just about repairing the muscle, Arthur. The body knows when the spirit is broken, but his choices are his own. You gave him the tools. What he chose to do with them is on him." 10 days into my stay, Martha knocked on my door. "Mr. Vance, you have a call. It's your son, Gregory." My hand shook as I took the receiver. "Gregory? Dad? Where the hell are you?" "I called your apartment landlord, and he said you hadn't come back. I had to call the hospital, and they told me you were discharged to a Dr. Edward Sinclair in Lake Forest." "What is going on? I'm recovering, Gregory. Since I had no one to help me at home, Dr. Sinclair was kind enough to offer me a place to stay." "Dr. Sinclair? The chief of cardiology?" Gregory's tone changed instantly, becoming eager and warm. "Dad, that's incredible. Brenda and I have been so worried. Work has been insane. But we want to come see you. We can drive out this Sunday." "Yes," I said. "You can come on Sunday at 2. I hung up, feeling a deep disappointment. He hadn't called to check if I was alive. He had only called because of Dr. Sinclair. Edward entered the room. "Arthur, before your son arrives, there is something you need to know. I had my attorney do some background checks on Gregory." "Edward, you shouldn't have." "I had to. Your son is in severe financial distress. His firm has lost major clients. He took out a second mortgage, and his wife's business is operating at a loss. They are weeks away from defaulting. Gregory is desperate, and when desperate people find out their father is staying with a wealthy physician, they see an opportunity." I closed my eyes. My son wasn't coming to see if his father's heart was still beating. He was coming to see how he could use my recovery to save his own skin. Sunday afternoon was cold. I sat in the living room by the fireplace. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Donald answered, and Gregory and Brenda walked in. Gregory looked sharp in a designer coat. Brenda was dressed in a stylish outfit, her eyes scanning the room, assessing the high ceilings and antiques. "Dad!" Gregory said, wrapping his arms around me in a tight embrace. It felt hollow. "You look great. We were so worried." "You blocked my number, Gregory," I said. Gregory flinched. "Dad, that was a misunderstanding, a technical glitch. Anyway, I'm just glad you're in such good hands." He turned to Edward, extending his hand. "Dr. Sinclair, I'm Gregory Vance, and this is my wife, Brenda. Thank you for your hospitality." "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance," Edward said, shaking Gregory's hand. "Please, sit." Brenda sat on the sofa. "Dr. Sinclair, your home is magnificent. Did you use a local designer?" "My late wife, Evelyn, handled the design," Edward replied. "It must be so quiet here," Brenda said. "Just you and the staff? It seems like a lot of space for one person." "It suits me," Edward said. Gregory cleared his throat. Dr. Sinclair, could we speak privately in your study? I'd like to discuss my father's care plan. Edward nodded. Of course, follow me. They walked down the hallway to the study. As soon as they left, Brenda leaned closer to me. Arthur, do you have any idea who Dr. Sinclair is? She whispered. He is worth at least $50 million. How did you get him to let you stay here? He was a student on my mail route 35 years ago, Brenda. He's repaying a kindness. A kindness? Arthur, this is a gold mine. Gregory's firm is looking for corporate clients. If you can just drop a word to him, it could turn everything around for us. I stared at her in disgust. To Brenda, I was simply a key to a vault she wanted to unlock. In the study, Gregory sat across from Edward's desk. Dr. Sinclair, Gregory began, my father's financial situation is not good. We want what's best for him. I think it would be best if he stayed here permanently. In exchange, I can obtain power of attorney to make sure his decisions are handled professionally. It would take the burden off you. Edward sat back. His eyes were cold. A very organized proposal, Gregory. But what do you stand to gain? Gregory's smile faltered. I'm his son. I'm just trying to protect his interests. His interests? Or your own? Edward asked. I know about the second mortgage, Gregory. I know you were on the verge of bankruptcy. You didn't come here because you care about Arthur. You came because you found out he was staying with a wealthy surgeon, and you wanted to use him to save yourself. Gregory stood up, his face red. You have no right to investigate my private life. I am the man who took him in when his own son blocked his number. Edward said, Sit down, Gregory. Gregory sank back into the chair, defeated. Edward opened his desk drawer and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote out a check and slid it across the desk. That is a check for $50,000, Edward said. It is enough to pay off your immediate debts, but it comes with strict conditions. What conditions? Gregory whispered. First, this money is for your debts, not Brenda's lifestyle. Second, you will repair your relationship with your father. You will call him, visit him, and treat him with love. Third, you will never ask either of us for money again. If you fail, I will personally ensure the senior partners at your firm learn exactly why you suddenly took an interest in your father's health. Gregory stared at the check. I need to think about it. You have until you leave this house, Edward said. A few minutes later, Gregory walked out of the study. He looked at me, his eyes filled with shame. Dad, Gregory said, can we talk? Outside in the garden. I stood up and walked out into the chilly air. The garden was quiet. Gregory kept his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground. Dad, Gregory finally began, I'm so sorry. For the hospital. For everything. Why did you do it, Gregory? Why did you block my number? Because I was ashamed, Gregory said, tears welling in his eyes. I wasn't the success you thought I was. The firm was falling apart, the debts were piling up. Every time I looked at you, I saw the man who sacrificed his entire life for me, and I realized I had ruined it all. I couldn't bear to tell you I had failed, so I ran away. I blocked your calls because every ring felt like a reminder of my failure. He wiped a tear. And then, when I found out you were staying with Dr. Sinclair, I thought I could use your connection to save myself. I was going to try to get power of attorney. I was disgusting, Dad. Dr. Sinclair offered me $50,000, but he told me I had to earn it by being a good son. I looked at my son. I saw the little boy who used to hold my hand on the way to the park. Gregory, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder, when your mother died, I chose to keep going because of you. Love isn't about only showing up when things are easy. Love is choosing someone even when they fail. You made terrible mistakes, but you are still my son. If you want to fix this, I am here, but it has to be real. Gregory broke down, sobbing, and pulled me into a gentle hug. I want to be your son again, Dad. I promise. I'll make it right. And he did. Gregory accepted Edward's check, but he and Brenda sold their house and moved into a modest townhouse. Brenda closed her unprofitable business and took a job. They entered counseling, and Gregory began therapy. Gregory called me every Tuesday and Thursday. We talked about sports, about memories of Eleanor. Every Sunday, Gregory would drive out to Lake Forest. We took long, quiet walks through the gardens. What Gregory didn't know was that Edward's check was post-dated to clear in 6 months. If Gregory had failed to repair our relationship, the check would have bounced. But Gregory never checked the date, and by then, he had already proven he wanted to be my son. I stayed at the Lake Forest estate permanently. Edward and I became like brothers. We agreed on a rent of $300 a month, which Edward secretly donated to charity. We spent 8 wonderful years together. We traveled to London, Rome, Tokyo. We hosted Sunday dinners, and when Gregory and Brenda had a baby girl, they named her Eleanor after my late wife. We called her Ellie, and she brought life back to the empty rooms. Edward passed away peacefully in his sleep at 79. Gregory stood by my side at the funeral, holding my arm as I said goodbye. At the reading of the will, Edward's attorney handed me a sealed envelope. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Edward's handwriting. Arthur, 35 years ago, you slipped a white envelope into the mailbox of a starving medical student. That envelope had $500 and a note. Keep going, someone believes in you. That note saved my life. I saved your life on the operating table, but you saved my soul by bringing friendship and family back into this empty house. I am leaving this estate and the bulk of my investments to you. I do this because I know you will use it to carry on the legacy of the envelope. Some struggling soul out there is on the verge of giving up. Be their miracle, Arthur. With love and gratitude, Edward, today I still live in the Lake Forest house. Gregory, Brenda, and little Ellie visit every weekend. I have established the Sinclair Vance Foundation, which provides scholarships to medical students from low-income families. Along with the tuition payment, every student receives a plain white envelope. Inside is a note that says, "Someone believes in you. Keep going, we save each other." Not with grand gestures, but with small, quiet acts of kindness when no one is watching. The smallest kindnesses echo across decades, and family, real family, is built not from blood but from choice. Every single day, we choose.